Hello, dear viewers. Today, we dive into a story that feels more like a novel than real life. A place where justice didn't come from a courtroom, but from one person brave enough to stand up for the truth. If you've ever been oppressed by ridiculous rules or witnessed injustice right in your own neighborhood, then help us spread this story. Don't forget to comment, like, and share this video to help build a stronger community. One where power must bow to the truth. Flexed biceps, United States. Have you ever been screamed at 6:45 in the morning over a fishing boat? Well, I have. I was still standing on my porch, coffee in hand, eyes barely adjusted to the first light of day, when a screech from the lakeshore pierced the air like a wartime siren. Jack Whitaker, get that disgusting boat off the water now. It violates HOA regulations. It was Karen, blonde hair shining like Broadway spotlights, wearing a neon lime green tracksuit, hands on her hips, standing on the lawn like she was leading an army. I turned my head slowly, still half asleep, and glanced toward the lake, where my old aluminum fishing boat, quiet and still like a dried fish, was floating peacefully next to my wooden dock. The dock sits right on my private property, which I bought outright from a retired farmer nearly 2 decades ago. Karen had no idea. I lifted my coffee cup, took a sip, and replied calmly, "Good morning, Karen." Want to try that again? Less yelling, more manners. But for Karen, manners were a dead language. She marched up the gravel path to my house like every pebble owed her back taxes. "You're in violation. Article 9, Section 3. No personal vessels allowed in community access areas," she shouted, yanking a printed color document from her jacket pocket. Probably the same HOA rules she carried around like scripture. I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, that dock is mine. That land is mine. That lake is mine too." She didn't hear me or pretended not to. "But it's on the lake, and the lake is community owned," Karen barked, her face turning red. "Oh, really?" I smirked. "Then maybe even the fish should ask your permission before swimming across." Damn, I never thought a tiny fishing boat would be the final straw. But when Karen whipped out her phone and threatened to fine me $100 a day if I didn't remove the boat within 72 hours, I knew it had gone too far. This wasn't about the boat anymore. This wasn't a petty early morning spat. This was a battle for the truth, and I was ready. I turned back into the house, opened the safe, and pulled out a pale yellow folder. Inside were the deed, water rights documents, land survey maps, every legal proof that the entire property, including the slice of lake Karen was screaming about, belonged to me. Karen didn't know that, but she was about to. And not just her. The entire neighborhood was about to learn that no one gets to scream at me on the land I spent my youth working to keep. Not today. Not this time. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of Karen's $100 a day threat, but because I knew she had stepped into the worst possible territory of her life. I sat under the yellow glow of my study lamp, spreading documents across the old oak desk. The folder lay still in my hand, like a verdict waiting to be signed. Karen thought this lake was community property. She was wrong. 17 years ago, I bought this land from a farmer named William Grady, a tough, quiet, straight-talking man. Back then, no one wanted to touch this place. A swampy stretch of land with a glass-still lake, no city water, no fiber optics, just frogs croaking and red maple trees in the fall. But I saw something different. I saw the peace this world was losing. When we signed the papers, William slid a thick envelope across the table and said one sentence, "Keep this safe. Not everyone understands the true value of that lake." I didn't get it at the time until I read through every page in the folder. Land ownership certificate, groundwater extraction rights, official survey maps from the planning office dated 1986. The most important thing, a handwritten note in red ink, stamped by the county planning office. Outside municipal zoning boundaries, not designated as public utility, confirmed private property, including lake. I hadn't needed that file for 17 years. No one had caused trouble. No one had challenged me. But Karen did. And that was when the secret needed to come out of the safe. The next morning, before the sun had even cleared the pines on the far side of the lake, I erected a large sign at the entrance to the dirt road that led to the water. White letters, clean and bold, no explanation needed. Private property, No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. 3 hours later, I saw Karen's golf cart screech to a halt halfway down the road like someone had stomped on its throat. She stepped out, face red like the sun sneezed on her. Behind her was a man in a pink polo, hair slicked back like a mirror, Tom Caldwell, the HOA's vice president. The two of them approached me like I had just destroyed NASA's broadcast tower. "Jack," Tom started, trying to sound calm, "we understand there's been a misunderstanding, but this lake, for as long as we've—" "It was never the HOA's," I cut him off. "You've never submitted a single request to incorporate this lake into community zoning. I have copies of the official land use maps from 3 separate eras. You don't have a single permit to use this water." Karen clutched her handbag tighter, her voice trembling with fury. "You can't just keep an entire lake as private property." I turned, pulled a folder from my coat pocket, flipped it open, and pointed to the court-certified signature. "I can, and I've done it since 2007. Karen's face went pale, like someone drained the color straight out of her skin. Tom took a step back. I lowered my voice, just enough for them to hear. "This is my water, Karen. Not for fines, not for your fishing events, and definitely not for your illusion of power." Then I walked away, leaving them there, small and silent, like paper dolls in the morning fog. For the first time in years, they realized the man they tried to trample wasn't just another resident. He was the one man in this entire neighborhood with the power to bring down the whole HOA, not with shouting, but with the law. I thought the warning sign and a fully documented legal file would be a wake-up call, but I underestimated Karen, or perhaps I misunderstood how far unchecked power is willing to go. 3 days after our meeting by the lake, I stepped out onto my porch and found a white envelope taped directly to my front door, like it was a subpoena from the Supreme Court. The HOA logo was embossed in the top left corner, and inside were 4 pages, long enough to read like a wartime indictment. I was being accused of unauthorized restriction of community resources, obstruction of scheduled recreational activity, and my personal favorite, non-cooperative behavior detrimental to neighborhood harmony. Absolutely ridiculous. I tossed the paperwork onto the kitchen table, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and made 3 phone calls within 20 minutes. The County Land Records Office, the Environmental Commission, and the District Resource Management Department. I requested all zoning maps, development records, and any documentation referencing the lakefront property from 1980 to the present. By that afternoon, I had in my hands something Karen clearly had never seen. A handwritten memo from the Planning Commission dated 1991, confirming that the lake was never designated as a community resource on any zoning map. It belonged solely to a single parcel of private land, mine. But Karen didn't back down. She did what only those drunk on unchecked authority dare to do. She sent people to trespass. Early the next morning, while fog still clung to the water's surface, I spotted 4 men in reflective vests hammering plastic stakes into the southern shore. A bright orange nylon barrier stretched over 60 feet. I threw on my coat, clipped a camera into my breast pocket, and walked directly to the scene. "What are you guys doing here?" I asked, voice calm and steady. One of them turned around, not exactly thrilled to see the landowner. "HOA hired us for a lakeside restoration project. They said it's community land." I took a deep breath. "This is private property. Do you have any written authorization from the landowner?" He shrugged. "We're just following a work order." "Well, I'm officially asking you to stop. This is unlawful trespassing. If you keep going, I'll call Sheriff Don Avery. And trust me, he doesn't take kindly to HOA overreach." That wasn't a threat. That was a reminder of the truth. 20 minutes later, the barrier was rolled up, the stakes pulled out. I stood there, arms crossed, like a wall that couldn't be knocked over. As their work truck drove away, I turned and saw Karen standing across the road, arms folded, lips pressed tight, eyes locked in an unblinking stare. Not a word, just watching. That afternoon, I filed an official complaint with the County Sheriff's Department. Charges of trespassing, unauthorized construction, and misrepresentation of public works intent. I attached copies of zoning documents, photos of the incident, and an audio recording of our morning exchange. Two deputies questioned Karen the very next morning. I didn't need to hear what they said. Tom Caldwell's confused expression, while standing beside her on the porch, told me everything. They'd opened a door without checking for traps on the other side. I didn't start this war, but once someone steps onto my land, I'll make sure they walk off it, carrying the full weight of the law. And this was only chapter 1 of a very long fight. I never set out to be a hero in my neighborhood, but sometimes silence becomes the sharpest weapon, and I had stayed silent long enough. 2 days after the illegal barrier incident, I received an email from Sophie Martinez, a familiar name, though I never expected her to reach out. She was the HOA treasurer, a quiet woman from the east side of the neighborhood, formerly an internal accountant for a large construction firm. The subject line contained only 3 words: need to meet. We met at the diner just off the county road. Sophie arrived early, carrying a thick, heavy black folder. She glanced around cautiously before sliding it across the table. "Karen's blocked access to the HOA account," she whispered, like she feared a recorder was hidden in the ceiling fan. "I suspected something months ago when she approved a $3,800 expense for aquatic biology equipment." I opened the folder, and that familiar wave of concealed truth washed over me. A long list of suspicious expenditures stretched across the pages. Payments to a company called Lakeworks LLC, with no tax ID. Handwritten checks made out to Shoreline Solutions, with no invoices attached, and one name that stood out, Kyle B., who had received over $9,000 in a single quarter. I asked, "Do you know who this person is?" Sophie shook her head. I looked up the address from one of the checks. It leads to a rundown apartment 2 towns over. "So it's a shell company." "And the HOA fund is being drained," she whispered. I wasn't surprised, but I was deeply disappointed. Not because of the money, but because of the shameless disregard for the community. That night, I didn't just make a plan. I started organizing. No social media, no forums. I handwrote letters, attached the expense list Sophie had given me, and included a formal invitation to an emergency meeting at the community center on Saturday. When the day came, over 60 people showed up. Some stood, some sat on the window ledges. Others brought folding chairs from home. Karen sat in the front row, lips tight, and Tom Caldwell beside her, looking like he'd been dragged there. Sophie stood first, her voice shaking but clear. "I'm the HOA treasurer, and I have a duty to disclose what's been happening with your money." I followed. "The lake you've been told belongs to the community, is private property, mine, and when I tried to protect it from misuse, I was threatened, slandered, and trespassed upon." The air in the room chilled, like the surface of a winter lake. An elderly man stood, voice skeptical. "Then, where's our money?" Sophie replied, "We don't know, but we're going to find out." A young woman added, "Why were checks made out to unknown individuals?" Someone else shouted, "Who approved the unauthorized construction at the lake?" The questions crashed like a dam breaking. Karen shot up, her voice theatrical. "This is a personal attack, a coordinated coup." But no one listened anymore. When trust breaks, denial becomes an empty echo. One resident raised their hand. "I move to immediately suspend Karen and form an interim committee to investigate." Applause erupted. Tom Caldwell, stood frozen, then slowly removed the HOA badge from his jacket and placed it on the table. No words, none needed. The battle had shifted into our hands, and this time, the light wasn't turning away. 3 days after the community meeting exploded like an earthquake, I heard a knock at my door. A man in a county sheriff's uniform stood there, holding a pale yellow envelope. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. "Jack Whitaker," I nodded. "You've been requested as the primary witness in the investigation into financial misconduct within the Lakeview Grove HOA." I signed. He walked away. I opened the envelope. Inside was an official subpoena, a list of required documents, and a memo from the district attorney's office. The charges were clearly outlined: embezzlement of funds, financial fraud, falsification of public records. And most damning of all, conspiracy to seize property through administrative deception. I wasn't surprised, but when I turned the page and saw the line, "suspected falsification of zoning maps," I knew Karen hadn't just stolen money, she had tried to steal my land. According to the Land Records Office, Karen had submitted a revised zoning map to the County Planning Commission nearly 6 months earlier. In it, the lake, clearly part of my property, was colored green, labeled as open community space, with no owner listed, no parcel number, and no private usage rights. She had tried to erase my name from the legal map, and it was only because a sharp-eyed county clerk spotted signs of Photoshop manipulation that the plan was frozen for review. I was invited to testify at the county administrative building. The man who met me there was federal investigator Nolan Reed, eyes like knives, questions that never repeated. Were you ever notified of any lake rezoning plans? No. Did you ever consent verbally or in writing? Never. Do you have proof of ownership? I brought everything, original maps, signed deed, water rights. Do you have a copy of the altered version? I do. I've highlighted the section where she intentionally removed my name. Reed nodded, scribbling notes nonstop. As I stood to leave, he looked up and said, Mr. Whitaker, your testimony isn't just helpful, it's foundational. Thanks to you, this is no longer a civil matter. It's now a state-level criminal case. 3 weeks later, Karen was arrested at her home. Handcuffed, no news crews, no press statement, just quiet justice. Tom Caldwell and Linda Prescott, the HOA's financial board members, were charged as accomplices in falsifying financial records. At the preliminary hearing, I was called as the opening witness. I wore the same old boots I'd had on the morning Karen screamed at me from across the lake. I told the whole story, the boat incident, the land deeds, the illegal fence, Sophie's email, the community meeting, and finally, the doctored zoning map. The defense attorney stood up, trying to rattle me. Do you have a personal grudge against Ms. Karen? I don't think protecting my land from theft qualifies as a grudge. You're seeking revenge, aren't you? Number. I'm seeking to let the truth stand on its own. The courtroom fell silent. Over 4 days, the prosecution laid out an ironclad case. Surveillance footage of Karen at the bank opening a fraudulent account. Emails showing wire transfers to a shell company under her cousin's name. Blank checks cashed with no explanation. The jury took just 92 minutes to deliberate. Karen, guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 8 years in prison. No parole for the first 5. Tom and Linda, 3 years probation. Permanently barred from serving on any financial board or civil organization. That evening, I walked back to the lake. The water was still, as if no screams had ever echoed across it. But this time, I wasn't alone. Neighbors brought out chairs. Children played on the grass. Sophie stood next to me and handed me a glass of sweet iced tea. We didn't just reclaim the lake, she said. We reclaimed our voice. I nodded, gazing into the sky, reflected on the water. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. That spring came later than usual. The snow melted slowly along the wooden planks of the dock, revealing pale streaks of moss, like time-worn scars. The lake was calmer than in previous years, not because there were fewer people fishing, but because something had shifted deep within the neighborhood itself. After the trial, Karen never returned. Her house went up for sale quietly on a sunless afternoon. No one said anything. No one needed to. That silence wasn't fear. It was relief. I didn't take any position in the new organization. When Sophie Martinez and the interim committee decided to dissolve the HOA and replace it with a new community trust, no enforcement powers, no rigid bylaws, I signed the charter. Then I stepped back into the place I had always belonged, the lakeshore. At the final community meeting before the center was renamed the Lakeside Trust, Sophie stood at the wooden podium, her voice as clear as light cutting through mist. Let this serve as a reminder. Power is never a reason to control. And no title, not president, not board member, not even Karen, can override the truth. The entire room fell silent, not because no one had anything to say, but because everyone felt it, in their bones. As I stood to leave the hall, Mr. Walter Jennings, who had lived in the very first house built here, handed me a warm cup of cider and said, I always thought that lake was just a backdrop. Turns out it was a boundary and a mirror. That night, I sat at the edge of the dock. My old flashlight lay beside me, the lake washed in the soft gold of the spring moon. No more shouting, no more warning letters taped to doors. Just the sound of insects and the quiet hum of a community learning to exist without being policed. Just as I was about to head back in, a strange light caught my eye, shining through the trees behind the community center. A new wooden plaque, posted just the day before. I walked toward it, lifted the beam of my flashlight, and read the words etched by a thin blade. Respect the truth. Respect the boundary. No signature, no emblem. Just a humble reminder, with weight far beyond its size, that some things can be lost. But in the end, they're kept alive by those who dared to stand when it mattered most. I nodded softly, then turned back, walking slowly, leaving the lake and the sky to become one. In a world where the voices of power often drown out the truth, Jack Whitaker's story reminds us, silence is not surrender. It can be a calculated pause before a righteous counterattack. No one wants to be the person standing against an entire system, but when personal rights are threatened, when honor and truth are twisted by those who claim to be the board or community representatives, then standing up is no longer a choice. It becomes a duty. The first and clearest lesson is this: know your rights, protect your documents, and always be ready with evidence. Jack didn't shout. He didn't slam fists on tables. He simply opened a safe, pulled out deeds, maps, legal proof, and let the truth speak for itself. In life, many people don't lose because they're wrong, but because they lack the proof when it matters. Carefulness, documentation, and respect for legal paperwork. These are the first shields against injustice. Secondly, this story teaches us that a strong community isn't built on control, but on transparency and empathy. The HOA wasn't wrong for existing, but it lost its way when it forgot its purpose, to serve the people. When power goes unchecked, it stops protecting and starts exploiting, just like Karen used it to embezzle funds, forge documents, and manipulate the truth. Third, sometimes one person stepping out of the shadows can light the way for everyone else. When Jack spoke up, others followed. When he stood his ground, the treasurer Sophie came forward with documents. And when they stood together, the entire neighborhood began to change. You don't have to be a leader, a commander, or a public figure to spark transformation. You just have to be brave enough to take that first step. And finally, the most powerful lesson comes in the final line of the story. Respect the truth. Respect the boundary. That isn't just the edge of a lake. It's the line between right and wrong, between freedom and control, between silence and action. In an age where reality can be blurred, rewritten, or overshadowed by louder voices or official titles, truth, when defended relentlessly, is still the brightest guiding light we have. Whether you live in a quiet neighborhood, a bustling city, or are just an ordinary person in a noisy world, remember, your rights are real. Your voice has power. And if you stand up for truth, you will never truly stand alone. If Jack Whitaker's story made you think, if it reminded you that justice still exists, or if you simply want to stand up for truth and boundaries, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Do you think Jack did the right thing? Did Karen deserve the consequences she faced? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, positive or critical, because every word you share becomes part of a much bigger conversation. Thank you for watching all the way through.